So this is the Daily Mirror of Friday, the 5th of March 2021. Now, this is part B of the KhoodeelaarTV Channel, broadcasting online, only on the internet, from London, UK. And this theme of this main broadcast is diagnosing, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And Fleet Street, of course, is the collective name for the newspapers that are printed from London addresses and are wrongly called the national newspapers, as the Sky News channel keeps telling its viewers. And Fleet Street is, of course, mainly typified in the ignorant, backward, racist, corrupt, and dishonest titles like the Daily Mail and the Rupert Murdoch-owned Scum. We call it Scum, which is the Sun. And the Sun is the one that is the pornographic front that earned Rupert Dirty Digger Murdoch billions of pounds and made him a billionaire. People in America, where Fox News and the New York Daily News are among the acquisitions of the Dirty Digger, may not realize that the billionaire tag was only achieved by the crook, Rupert Dirty Digger Murdoch, selling the pornographic daily Scum and making the money and dodging taxes in various ways. Now he owns, of course, the Times newspaper, the Sunday Times, and the Sun on Sunday, or the Scum on Sunday, which is the kind of circulation replacement for the news of what the private lie used to call news of the screws, that are based on the complete and utter dependence on the dishonesty of the pornographic kind of activities, and also of the dodgy behavior of many of the police personnel. Screws is also used as a colloquial for the police. Now, today's Fleet Street are full of attacks on Meghan Markle. And even the Daily Mirror, which was expropriated and abused and owned by Robert Maxwell, and was supposedly aligned to the Labour Party politically. Even this has the actual top half of the paper dedicated to another exclusive in promoting the lie, the 10 ex-royal staff to aid bully probe against Meghan Markle. That is a complete pack of lies, and we shall be diagnosing that in more detail in due course. But that is one young person being targeted by direct assault on their image. And they're running 2-page spread on pages 8 and 9, featuring pictures of Princess Di and Meghan Markle, and they're admitting that Brenda's monarchy is in a crisis, and they're asserting in the next part that Brenda will reign, or they're saying that Brenda will rise above this mess and ensure the crown will survive. Now, for any country, or any part of the country, or any part of the propaganda of a country, propaganda operations, to say that the monarchy is in crisis and then that says that the crown will survive is a pathetic admission that they have no clue as to what the real purpose to democracy this crown is supposed to be, and they don't have any concern about whether the people abused under the crown, various kind of abuses and excuses. For example, there is in the unwritten constitution a thing called the crown privilege. Crown privilege is the unlimited power allowed a dictator to abuse against anything or anybody. And Brenda, in other words, Queen Elizabeth II, has been abusing her position throughout the reign of nearly 60 years, as has been revealed by accident, let's say, recently in the last few weeks, that Brenda has been abusing her unwritten constitutional kind of power and crown privilege and all the rest of it. When I say privilege, I also include crown prerogative. These are corrupt components of the unwritten constitution, and there is no evidence in any part of Fleet Street, including the Daily Mirror, the Mirror Group, in the sense of being not openly, slavishly aligned to serve the conservatives. So the Mirror and the Guardian, which is the most poisonously dubious operation going in the Fleet Street. The Guardian has got all kinds of faces to expropriate the kind of credit for being aligned to liberal, democratic kind of tendencies and miniature movements. So, but there is no contemporary or recent or recorded evidence of any of these titles, the Mirror, the Guardian, or the Observer, looking factually and evidentially and ethically and morally and transparently and democratically and independently and objectively. Look at the values that I have listed. Remember the values. You can go back on the tape and hear again. These are significant, important values that are exclusive to our campaign, have been exclusive right from the beginning, for almost as long as Brenda has been enthroned, give and take a few years. So our campaign has been contemporaneous, active, right alongside Brenda's sitting in the crown. And we find her actually not doing the job. But that simple statement that Brenda has been failing, even the pretense monarchy, is not to be found anywhere in Fleet Street. Not in the Guardian, not in the Mirror, not in the Observer, not in the Sunday People, so-called, not in the Financial Times and all the others. So the attack on Meghan Markle on the front page, top half of the Daily Mirror is repeated on the front page of the Daily Star. Well, we shall now name this Daily Star as Daily Scar, not to be confused with the Morning Scar, but this is a scar. And they've got this one. They've got this completely explosive, lying, racist hate front page hate splash. And they are absolutely, they could not be more brazenly servile to Brenda's operation at Buckingham Palace. And now they're saying on page 9 that lunatic Jeremy Paxman murders squirrels while he's in the loo. And this is a reluctant admission by the racist morons. Remember the footnote? Well, the actual note that I created the persona. I forced the BBC to create something to rehabilitate the racist Jeremy Paxman in the mid-1980s, because I identified him and I diagnosed him and I completely exposed his racism and stupidity while he was fronting the nationwide slot on BBC One. And the BBC rushed to rehabilitate him by running a big profile of him in the Listener magazine, which was at that time owned and controlled by the BBC. So they created the mythology of the personality of Jeremy Paxman in all the years that he was fronting the Newsnight slot. Paxman failed the basic test of telling the truth. And in fact, his servility and servile mentality was exposed when he personally delivered an apology in an envelope which he left under the door of Mandy Mandelson. Mandy Mandelson was a key ally of Tony Blair. And Mandy Mandelson was named for the first time in public on a public platform by the former conservative and Thatcher-worshipping, Rhodesia-born racist, self-confessed racist, Matthew, who is now writing a weekly column on the Murdoch Guardian. And this Matthew had named Mandy Mandelson as having a Brazilian or South American gay boyfriend or whatever. And after he did that, on the program that was fronted, or the item that was fronted by Jeremy Paxman, at the end of the evening, Paxman then went to Mandy Mandelson's house and left this letter of apology to the effect that he didn't either incite the conservative, ex-conservative or conservative MP Matthew, nor did he encourage him to name him. And that was the kind of proof, if proof were needed, that far from being rigorous, independent, and morally outspoken, Jeremy Paxman was a complete and utter kind of servile stooge, careerist opportunist, because he didn't want the Blair regime or Blair-fronted regime, or even Mandy Mandelson, because Mandelson wielded significant fixing and unfixing of careers, powers, and influences. So Paxman didn't want to lose that. So that is Jeremy Paxman now reported as being a murderer of squirrels. Notice what I'm saying. Not what I'm saying, it is what is admitted reluctantly, of course. as evident in this piece on the Daily Scar, which page 9 of today, Friday, the 5th of March 2021. And there is a kind of innocent piece about Sarah Harding, that she is suffering from cancer and her friends have rallied together to support her, which is fair enough. And there is a 2-page spread about the people who are missing. It's 8 pages of unsolved mysteries, and it has got quite a bit about people who have gone missing and not found. Now, there is no reporting, investigation on the phenomenon of the people gone missing and not found. And that should be there, but there is not that. So what we are saying is the National Union of Journalists, to which many of the Fleet Street employed journalists, so-called, belong as members, has got aims and objectives for journalistic standards that the National Union of Journalists members should observe and follow. But there is no connection between that aim and object and the actual practice of not following those aims and objects by the employees on the Fleet Street papers. And the Guardian is running one item which has got the headline, which is one of the timidest, saying Patel and civil servant in £340,000 settlement. So what this does, this kind of language, it actually lowers the level of liability by the bully, Priti Patel, and makes her victim come across as equal, as if the bully and the bullied were on the same level. They were not. And this is not even a tip of the iceberg, it's worse. Because the numbers of so-called civil servant, that is a completely misleading phrase, civil servant. They're neither civil nor servant. Their behavior is completely offensive, and they arrogate to themselves the assumption or the assumed superiority as based on their victims, which is the members of the public coming into contact with them. These uncivil, disservant, which is the phrase that actually suits their actual real conduct. Uncivil disservant or service deniers are allowed that status of assuming superiority to members of the public because of the lack of morality, lack of ethics and accountability in the Constitution and in the absence of the Constitution itself. And when the Fleet Street papers actually publish stuff, wrongdoing, like ugly behavior by Priti Patel, They should, but they don't. Put those behavior and those conducts in the accounts and the reports, whatever extent of kind of dilution they apply in covering up those kind of behavior and conduct. They should refer to the UK's international law obligations or the UK's obligations, UK as a state, UK's obligations under international law. And in international law, because the international law is present in all the articles, conventions, agreements, and declarations, international declarations, conventions, international agreements, and statements that the UK as a state has signed up to. And by signing up to those, constitutionally, legally, the United Kingdom became obliged or accepted obligation to conform to the requirements of those agreements, conventions, statements, declarations, and so on. There are thousands. There are quite literally thousands of those over the years. And the UK government has a dedicated so-called website. This is information, analytical, diagnostic information for anyone who is viewing for scholastic and fact gathering and fact checking purposes. There is a dedicated website or portal that contains archived copies of all these or thousands of agreements and protocols and declarations and conventions that the UK has been signing. And what the reluctance or refusal or the choice or the decision, call it whatever, the decision to not run or refer to any of those conventions by the Fleet Street Papers exposes the Fleet Street Papers as being stupidly edited, written, and published. Apart from being dishonest and racist and all the other kind of contemptible aspects of their role and behavior and narrative, the Fleet Street Papers are idiotically written and printed and edited. Because any intelligent audience of readers or researchers or people who, after the event, after the publication, go and search the archives of the newspapers and look for references to these, will not find the references which they should be finding. Because the signatures and the signing of the treaties are not plastic events. These are events to affect daily decisions concerned in the particular sphere, particular aspect of the particular transactions. And they are not. So this absence is not just an absence in terms of journalism, but this is an absence in terms of obligations, moral, legal, constitutional, democratic obligations. All right? The democratic obligations being that they make available the facts to their readers and supporters and advertisers, whatever. The facts of the framework of international law. An international law framework is not about some far distant outer space kind of land on the skies. These are about internal, UK internal transactions, exchanges, contracts, and behavior and relationships, and the agreements and the requirements of the agreements for the parties to stick to those agreements. Now, if Priti Patel, the ugly behavior of Priti Patel, is referred to as settlement by the Guardian, then it is what the Guardian is doing. The Guardian is colluding with Patel and the Home Office in the lying narrative. Because the whole reason why the former head of the Home Office Civil Service, or the uncivil disservants, if you like, who resigned and mounted a public campaign against the harassment and the bullying of him and his co-staff carried out by Priti Patel. These were in breach of many of those obligations and conventions and treaties and whatever. And those were meant to be to provide protection to civil servants or employees, let's say, in the public service. That is more accurate and neutral representation. Public employees or public service or employees. And yet the Guardian gives Priti Patel equality of treatment with her victim. Now, Philip Ratnam is not, of course, the only one that has broken, as it were, the ranks and spoken about the various abuses and bullying that have been going on at various locations of the Conservative fronted, Boris Johnson fronted cabal, aka government. And there is this admission in the, so that is the Guardian failing. So we are pointing at the Guardian's failing in this piece. This is a piece in failure of the duties by the Guardian to tell the truth and to expose, if you like, with evidential references, the behavior of the Home Office and the UK government under Priti Patel in violating the legal obligations that they are under and have been under and were under, according to the treaties and conventions concerned, the declarations and statements and agreements concerned that the UK signed up to. Because all these agreements and treaties, this is another additional note for understanding, factual understanding, essential facts for the understanding of the UK's non-existent constitution. And that is the remit and the kind of area of knowledge that is essential for any student of law, any practitioner of law, and any kind of commentator on the so-called legal system. That although there is no constitution in the written, conventionally written form, the UK has a substitute type of constitution, which is represented by these conventions, including the royal prerogative, the crown prerogative, and the operation of the so-called Privy Council. Now, the Privy Council is the most secret of the council that Brenda, or the monarch, kind of presides over, or notionally is the head of. The Privy Council is the collection of what they call the Right Honourables. Right Honourable cannot be used by any country other than in England. But in places like Bangladesh, idiotic morons still suffering from mental slavery to the British Raj assign to one another or to their favorites, kind of bosses or whatever, the Right Honourable. Anyone who is a member of the so-called parliament in Bangladesh is not right honorable because they are a member of the so-called parliament. I say so-called parliament because Bangladesh parliament has never been really democratic. And it cannot be democratic if the people involved as quote parliamentarians or party managers or party cabals are themselves contemptuous towards the idea of democracy and public representation and accountability. We shall return to that in due course, but back to Brenda's Privy Council. So the Privy Council has got people from all kinds of backgrounds, but they're not necessarily all members of parliament. But they have got this title based on the Privy Council membership called Right Honorable. And the secrecy is that they are sworn to secrecy. So they are actually willing participants in the violation of the universal tenets and requirements of constitution and constitutionality. And in the case of the newspapers, there was a thing called the D notice. The D notice meant that the UK government could issue any kind of restrictions on newspapers, banning them from publishing certain news about certain activities. And those activities may happen to the detriment of the safety of the population and the public. And the government bans the newspapers. And it's called the D Notice Committee, which issues the thing on behalf of the Crown. So Fleet Street is not only self-restrained in terms of telling the truth, it is also restrained, in addition to that, by the operation of the D Notice and the operation of the powers of the Privy Council. And members of the Privy Council have got significant leeway they can apply to forbid and prohibit the exercise of freedom of speech. And there is no freedom of speech, objectively speaking, in this country, and not evident in the behavior of the Fleet Street papers, because their idea of freedom is to follow the instructions of Brenda or follow the racist instincts, and which is what is happening with the focus on the attention of hatred, piled up hatred against Meghan Markle. This being Friday, 2 days on or day after tomorrow is supposed to be the day when Oprah Winfrey's interview with the pair, Meghan Markle and Harry, will go on air. And in the next, let's say 48 hours, it is absolutely clear that the amount of venom, the amount of vilification against Meghan and Harry will accentuate and will be exacerbated and will be aggravated to the highest physically possible limit. And the kind of pain that they are plotting to inflict on Meghan and Harry in revenge of the Oprah Winfrey interview will exceed by the measure of 1,000 any pain, the annus horribilis. The horrible year that Brenda complained of and moaned about. And Brenda is now leading the charge of inflicting as much pain and as much horrifying and horrible experience on Meghan and Harry as her propaganda servants in the Fleet Street and also elsewhere in the BBC, this Sky News, etc., can carry the load of it, deliver. And they will be delivering, because the Boris Graf is leading on Friday, the 5th of March 2021, with a different headline. The picture is the same, Meghan's picture, but it's saying that Meghan and Harry were not informed of bullying inquiry, which is most likely because Brenda has been exposed as having been in chair or in the crown, if you like, or wearing the crown, or on the throne or in the throne, whatever, by perpetrating on the quiet a series of devastating, unconstitutional perpetrations of her own agenda against the constitutionally, supposedly in place government. Remember, she is referred to as the constitutional monarch, which means that she has to abide by the constitution. But there is this typical British kind of corruption inherent in this idiotic phrase, constitutional monarch. There is no constitution, and there is no constitutionality that can be actually assessed by applying the rules and the requirements of the written constitution. So it's free for all. I mean, it's as she pleases, as her kind of whims and caprices prompt her to do at that given time. Brenda can do anything. In other words, she's a kind of disguised dictator. And the disguised dictatorship of the monarch, sitting monarch, is far more damaging to the whole country and the trademark kind of brand, the British brand. All kinds of things are still referred to by the morons in countries like Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan that actually refer to anything British or British institutions with the kind of deference that should only be applied when the topic or the title of deference or the source of the deference or the destination of the deference ethically and morally deserves to be deferred to. But the contaminated legacy of the British Raj and the racist empire does not warrant that. And yet, these morons in Bangladesh and the counterpart morons in Kolkata and in Mumbai and in Delhi and in Chennai and other places, and in Pakistan, Karachi and Lahore and other places, those morons are expressing servility in order to kind of impress their fellow persons with the supposed reference to a supposed superior source of authority or reference. So when we say we are doing worldwide exclusive of Fleet Street, we are literally doing that. We are not just using these as tags. Original, and we are doing this substantially on substantiated and substantive basis of evidence, full stop. No guesswork and no fabrication, no fairy tailing. As rigorous can be on the objective tests. This is not, again, for newcomers or anyone who has forgotten what we stand for and what we represent in this when we say that it's the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. We mean that the known schools of journalism or media studies that exist in the UK, none of them has ever done what we do one day. And they don't come to anywhere near doing it on a kind of sustained basis. So we are offering something beyond the available academic and intellectual analysis offered by Oxbridge or the counterparts across the Atlantic. at the MIT or the Harvard, or even these counterparts in New York and in Washington or in California, and none in the Canadian kind of sphere. North America, Canada, and the United States are places which exist on the graves of millions of original nations, people murdered and massacred and genocided by the Europeans during the centuries, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. And numerically, the number is smaller in what is called South America. But essentially, the culture is the same. These are genocides running the so-called democracies, Western civilization, so-called. And the expression Western civilization is itself contentious and will be explained and updated in due course and later. And the Boris Graph's overhyped page one cartoonist, Matt, has been commissioned into service to debase Meghan Markle and to debase Harry. And back to the Brexit by the Boris Graph. It says, the Boris Graph on front page says, Europe's volte-face on Oxford vaccine. Germany performs latest about turn on AstraZeneca jab as Italy blocks shipment. It's a very long mouthful of the allegations hatefully conjured up by the Boris Graph to maintain hatred against the European Union. The facts have not anything to do with the volte-face or about turn that the main heading claims. The European Union began blocking exports of the AstraZeneca vaccine yesterday as Europe's leaders admitted they were wrong about the Oxford jab. The European Union countries now recognize that the AstraZeneca jab is vital to ramp up the slow pace of their vaccination program, which lags far behind Britain, the US, Serbia, and Israel, after attacking the British-Swedish pharmaceutical company, that is AstraZeneca, for delivering failures and branding its vaccines ineffective. And that's the last word that is what is aching them. AstraZeneca vaccine has been overhyped, overrated, and overpromoted, and oversold. And there is no evidence that it is definitively effective in preventing the virus. And that is what is causing them the ire, the anger, the Boris Graph, that is. And here is the daily Boris Graph's version about what Jeremy Paxman has been kind of up to. Now, this one is not in the headline anyway, not admitting that he is a murderer of squirrels, but they're running on the aspect of his speed about any fool can read the news. This is the other version of what they said, that the news can be read by suits. And we said that the news is increasingly kind of treated as it has been, but it is still continuing to be used visually as a pornographic component, because increasingly the faces on television screens are faces of women of certain age, which is ideally to the manufacturers of these kind of presentations aged under 30. And that's what effectively that's what Paxman is saying, because there is no criteria, there is no measure for intelligence, wisdom, competence, rigor, and transparency, and so on. Now, in the next part, we shall be updating on the campaign for justice for Shamima Begum, because the campaign which we started effectively on the 26th of February, following the publication of the racist and stupid ruling by the stupid Supreme Court against Shamima Begum's rights. Now that campaign, that aspect of our campaign was only the latest aspect of our campaign for the rights of Shamima Begum and the other children that were affected. We began campaigning very shortly after the news was kind of published that Shamima Begum and her two school friends went across into Syria in February 2015. So 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. This is 6 calendar years since they were reported to have crossed into Syria, and we founded the campaign, or began the campaign for their rights, because until that news we had no idea of their existence. So therefore there was no reason for us to have started any campaign, because they didn't exist as far as we knew. Now 6 calendar years later, we hear today that a number of references have been made about Shamima Begum by people who were absolutely scared, shitless to even mention Shamima Begum. Because these are mental slaves of various kinds and degrees, including several so-called counselors, including this infantile child solicitor called Tasneem Akunje. Akunje is a very artificial boy. He doesn't have the depth or the wisdom or the morality. And yet somehow he was kind of appointed to act as the family solicitor initially of Shamima Begum, etc. I say etc. Well, I shall come to that shortly. And Akunje has failed to communicate even the basic courteous recognition of the role that we have been playing. We alone have been playing in putting at the right level the case, that is the argument for the rights of these children that have been betrayed, let down, misrepresented. So apparently, Akunje colluded with a number of mental slaves and stooges and has pretended that they are now talking about Shamima Begum outside of the frame of the court cases and court bureaucracies. We shall examine in depth the contents and then we shall communicate and publish and share our commentary and our findings on the contents. But before we do the studying of the contents or sharing of the contents, let's say this, that none of these, including Akunje, is ever going to do the right thing and demand what we are demanding. Let's say that. But what they're going to do, they're stealing ideas and pretending that they have originally come up with this. This is not acceptable. We tell them not to do that again. And we tell them to refer to the sources, platforms that have actually said the things that they are repeating without citing the source. Because Akunje, as a licensed law trader, is never going to be independently speaking for the rights of Shamima Begum and the other children. And Akunje, as a careerist, is mapping his career by reflecting, by exploiting the reflected glory that can come from coming across as a campaigner for justice for Shamima Begum. We are the people who are campaigning for justice for Shamima Begum and our close school friends. So the least that Akunje could do is to recognize and acknowledge the fact that we have been the ones that have been talking about this, nobody else. No other lawyer, not even the so-called human rights professionals, including the Human Rights Watch. The Human Rights Watch, the person that is supposedly the director of the Human Rights Watch in the UK, is another opportunistic careerist liar. She has no interest whatsoever in doing campaign for Shamima Begum and campaign for justice for Shamima Begum and the other children that were betrayed and have been betrayed. This one, the so-called Human Rights Watch director in the name of UK, was quick on the LBC racist radio slot on Friday the 26th of February 2021. And she spewed idiocy, banalities, and stupidities, and pro-racist, accommodating, corrupt expressions of capitulation. That will not do, and we shall not allow these liars to make claims that they are in the least bothered about her Shamima Begum and her need for justice. Any Tower Hamlets councillor who says, did the Tower Hamlets Council do its duty, etc., under prevent, is being a moron. Of course that didn't. But what on earth were these morons doing as being councillors? It was their duty, these morons, as elected councillors, to ask questions of the midget, liar, racist John Biggs. When the news came out in February 2015, the incumbent was Lutfur Rahman. But since 11th of June 2015, the incumbent has been John Biggs as the incumbent so-called mayor. And all these councillors have not suddenly arrived into our hamlets. They have been into our hamlets. Whether they were councillors before May 2018 or not doesn't matter. They have been lining up to become councillors throughout all that time. If that is the case, and it is the case, then why were they silent about Shamima Begum? Who did they think would do the job of defending and speaking up for the rights, for the right entitlements of Shamima Begum and her friends? So we shall be talking more in the next part